firefighters, police officers, teachers, sanitation workers, other essential frontline workers at risk. So let me proceed. Madam President, Senate Republicans have unveiled a proposal for a second line of support for American families and small businesses as our nation continues to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. The virus is an unprecedented challenge, but we shall overcome. And the HEALS Act attempts to do that. The introduction of this proposal signals Republicans' commitment to see America through this challenging time, as was with the CARES Act. Now, the health and safety of the people of Louisiana and the United States are my top priority. And the HEALS Act, as with all major bills, is a starting point of negotiations to build consensus among members of both parties for the best path forward. Now, the HEALS Act includes stimulus checks for Americans, support for small businesses, billions to help schools reopen, and while these are critically important to economic recovery, so too are the essential services provided by states and local communities. I'm talking about police officers, firefighters, teachers, sanitation workers, other municipal workers, and because of this economic lockdown, state and local government have seen their tax base erodes, which threatens their ability to keep these very people we need employed, these people who keep our communities running. I don't want to see, for example, a situation where city/police budgets force layoffs of those who put their lives in line to keep us safe. That's why Congress should include additional relief for state and local communities in this relief package. Senator Bob Menendez and his staff has been a wonderful team to work with, and I have offered a bipartisan proposal called the SMART Act to help communities through this pandemic, and I'm privileged to be joined today by Senator Menendez and Senator Collins to speak on his behalf. The SMART Act calls for $500 billion in funding for state and local government, and it would be dispersed in thirds. 1/3 based on a state's population. Clearly, California needs more than Alaska. 1/3 is based upon COVID-19 impact. My state has had one of the highest per capita incidences of coronavirus infection. We've been terribly impacted. And 1/3 is based upon revenue loss, which again, my state, as well as the states of my colleagues, have been very impacted. It is a fair formula that prioritizes funding to the hardest hit. The need is great. S&P Global released a report detailing the state's susceptibility to fiscal distress in a COVID-19 recession. 38 states had a high or very high risk of economic exposure. S&P findings echo a Moody's report, which also predicted dire effects to states and cities if nothing is done. Moody's found that 34 states will see tax revenue fall by double-digit percentage points, worst of which is Alaska, falling 80%, Louisiana at 46%, and North Dakota at 44%. According to the National Association of Counties, local communities, not states, local communities anticipate a $202 billion impact to budgets through 2021. Their report shows that will you put this up, please? Their report shows that 71% of counties have delayed capital investment, including infrastructure and economic development projects. 68% have cut or delayed county services or parish services in the case of Louisiana, human services, public safety, and community development support. 25% have cut the county workforce. Moody's estimates that 1.3 million have already been laid off, and an estimated 1.4 million more state and parish and county workers and municipal workers will be laid off in the coming fiscal year. And then 66% of counties receiving the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund have either indicate that the funding will not cover the COVID-19 budget, or they are uncertain if the budgetary impacts will be covered. This is the impact to what has happened. By the way, we spoke earlier of $202 billion, and this is how the breakdown is in terms of lost revenue, lost state funding, et cetera. the impact upon state and county and municipal governments is huge. All told, the National Association of Counties predicts a loss of 4.9 million jobs and $344 billion lost in GDP. It does not have to be that way. We can save jobs for police officers, firefighters, teachers, and others by including state and local support in the act that we are considering. As I mentioned before, Louisiana, my state, is facing serious shortfalls. We are still struggling with a second wave of COVID cases. Yesterday, we had the #1 per capita incidence of coronavirus. The state is having to continue in a phase 2 lockdown which strains not only my folks in Louisiana, but also the revenue of the local communities where they would otherwise spend their money. Now, folks back home, no consequences if they don't receive support. 22 parish presidents signed a letter supporting the SMART Act, writing, quote, "As elected leaders with parish populations ranging from over 400,000 to 18,000, the COVID-19 pandemic has created unprecedented challenges for all local governments, not only within Louisiana, but nationally. The extreme loss of tax revenue, which provides for essential services, coupled with unforeseen costs brought onto us responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, has the potential to have an extremely detrimental effect on our role to provide for the citizens of our parishes." I received a letter from more than 80 mayors across my state giving, quote, their strong support and thanks for efforts to pass the SMART Act because they know I'm working to deliver the support they need for their communities, our mutual constituents. And mayors ranging from cities as large as Shreveport to as small as Glenmora and Athens write, the SMART Act would provide funding for municipal economic recovery that will support the reopening of businesses and allow Louisiana to move forward. We are grateful for Senator Cassidy's bipartisan efforts and his longstanding partnership with Louisiana's municipal governments. The same sentiments have been echoed by Louisiana's Chamber of Commerce. Now, I understand concerns about spending money on state and local government. Some are worried the money would be used to bail out poor management decisions and overly generous and unfunded pension plans. I share those concerns, which is why the SMART Act includes specific provisions prohibiting spending in those areas. The SMART Act money replaces lost revenue caused by COVID-19 and nothing more. A city or parish or county would have to show their books and show that they've lost revenue relative to a year ago before they would be eligible to receive funding from this. And I understand concerns about spending, but the cost of doing nothing is worse. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell spoke on the state and local funding needs, saying that while costly, it would be, quote, worth it if it helps avoid long-term damage and leaves us with a stronger economy. Madam President, Congress should not allow police officers, firefighters, first responders, teachers, sanitation workers, and others to lose their job by the millions at a time when our country needs them most. The United States cannot fully recover economically if local communities cannot provide basic services allowing commerce to flow. So as I end, I commend my colleagues on the work thus far on the HEALS Act. More work is left to be done, and I look forward to working with others in this chamber in the coming days to strengthen this bill even further and finding a common path forward with our Democratic colleagues. We cannot let Americans down in this time of tremendous need. By working together, we can deliver the support they need. We'll be stronger as a nation for having done so. And Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, I rise today to join my Republican colleagues from Louisiana and Maine to make a plea for us to break any partisan logjam and support bipartisan, common sense solutions. And I want to especially commend Senator Cassidy, who from the beginning has joined me in this effort and has been true to his commitment to the issue and to his word. We've engaged in a series of conferences with major national organizations in support of the legislation, and I appreciate his leadership in this regard. I also appreciate Senator Collins, who joined us from the very beginning in this effort. Exactly 76 days ago, 2.5 months ago, Senator Cassidy and I stood here on the floor of the Senate with our colleagues, Senators Collins and Booker, to talk about the challenges facing our state and local governments and the need for Congress to deliver robust, flexible assistance to help them deal with the pandemic and the economic fallout. In 76 days, we've seen COVID-19 sweep across our land. The virus is surging in states coast to coast, from the deep South to the upper Midwest. No community has been spared. America is no stranger to tough times. In just the past 100 years, we fought 2 world wars. We faced a Great Depression. We confronted a nuclear-armed Soviet Union. We faced calamitous disasters, both natural and man-made, from Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy to the terrorist attacks on 9/11. We have lived through many dark days of our history. But no matter how steep the challenge, no matter how hopeless things appeared at the moment, we always came together as a country, and we saw ourselves as Americans above all else. Now, I'm proud to be a New Jerseyan. I'm proud to be from a state that invests in its people, has a great education system, and is an innovative economy. But when my parents fled tyranny in Cuba, their dream wasn't to move to any one state. No, they dreamed of moving to the United States of America, to give me and my siblings the opportunity they never had. We are not a collection of 50 separate states. No, we are one nation, indivisible. When hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast, flooding inundated communities along the Mississippi River, wildfires rage in the West, I've never hesitated to act and cast my vote to help my fellow Americans. I've never asked how many New Jerseyans were affected or how this would impact my state. But some in this body have chosen to undermine that unity and to instead pit Americans in one state versus their fellow citizens in another. They have derided Senator Cassidy and my efforts to avoid millions of layoffs of essential workers as a, and I quote, a blue state bailout. For example, the junior senator from Florida has said he refuses to support assistance because it will go to progressive states like New Jersey, New York, California. He spreads falsehoods about states carrying over large annual budget deficits, even though he must be well aware that states, unlike the federal government, must balance their budgets according to their state constitution. He has the gall to chide other states about taking from Florida, even as his own state is the second largest taker state in the entire country. Indeed, according to the latest estimates, Florida receives about $45 billion more from the federal government than it pays each and every year. By comparison, New Jersey actually pays about $21 billion more each year to the federal government than it receives. So let me say that again. Florida takes $45 billion per year out of the federal coffers, more than they put in. New Jersey puts $21 billion back in. So to my colleague from Florida, you're welcome. And why is New Jersey a donor or maker state while Florida is a taker state? Quite simply, it's because we invest in our people and in our communities. New Jersey has the best public schools in the country, ranking #1 in Education Week's 2019 report. Florida, well, it ranked in the bottom half of states. A better education leads to a better economy with higher paying jobs, so it's no surprise that New Jersey also has the highest per capita income among states at over $110,000 per year. By comparison, Florida's per capita income is almost $35,000 less, which puts it once again in the bottom half of states. So if you want your children to have a quality education, if you want to work in a vibrant economy that creates high-paying jobs, you should live in a state like New Jersey. But New Jersey, like all states, and through no fault of our own, is facing a health and fiscal crisis of historic magnitude. And because here in Washington we have failed to implement a national response to a national emergency, our local towns, cities, counties, and states have to deal with this crisis alone, rather than united as a nation. And they are running out of money. They're running out of money to combat this deadly disease. They're running out of money to maintain the services of our residents and businesses depend upon. They're running out of money to pay our first responders, police, firefighters, paramedics, emergency personnel. They're running out of money to make sure that there are teachers in the classrooms when our kids can safely head back to school, and nurses in our hospitals when a sick patient is brought in. They're running out of money to make sure the trash gets picked up, the buses and trains run on time, and the lights stay on at City Hall. They've been squeezed on both sides of the ledger, spending billions of dollars in unforeseen costs on emergency response while watching revenues dry up due to the slowing economy and necessary orders to contain the virus. Without help from Washington, our states, counties, and municipalities will have to swallow a toxic cocktail of tax hikes, service cuts, and layoffs that will only poison our economic recovery. It would be the height of irony, and a horrible one at that, for the men and women we've needed the most to be the ones fired as a result of the economic distress that the virus has created. We need our essential workers on the job dealing with the pandemic, not on the unemployment line. Already, nearly 1.5 million state and local workers have been furloughed or laid off, and that's only since February, and double the total local public sector jobs we lost during the entire Great Recession of a decade ago. If we fail to deliver the robust, flexible funding our states and communities need, we are effectively sending pink slips to millions of Americans. We're saying to all of them, you're fired. That's millions more who aren't collecting a paycheck, millions who can't afford to shop at our store, eat at our restaurants, pay their rent or their mortgage. Leading economists, respected by both parties, predict it would decimate our economy and send us on the path to another Great Depression. We can't allow that to happen. That's why Senator Cassidy, Senator Collins, Senator Hyde-Smith, and I came together. We saw early on the impact COVID-19 was having on our home states and constituents. So we came up with the State and Municipal Assistance for Recovery and Transition, or the SMART Act. As Senator Cassidy says, it delivers $500 billion in flexible funding to frontline states, counties, and municipalities. It targets areas with the greatest need based on infection rate and lost revenues, and unfortunately, from when we started this, that is a growing reality across the country. And every single town, city, and county, regardless of its size, would qualify for direct funding. No one is left out. We immediately built a bipartisan coalition with Senators Collins and Booker, Hyde-Smith, Manchin, and Sinema, Republicans and Democrats from all walks of life, cutting across the political and geographic spectrum. We knew the assistance Congress provided our state and local governments in the CARES Act wasn't enough to deal with the growing need. And we warned our colleagues, each and every one, that what was happening in New Jersey and Louisiana and elsewhere would eventually come to your state if we didn't get this pandemic under control. Well, we haven't, and it's raging. And our fellow Americans are suffering, and too many of them are dying. Now, we've waited for 76 days, and what is now being offered is wholly inadequate to address the needs of the American people. In Colorado, for example, the estimated state and local shortfall due to the pandemic is $10 billion and counting through 2022. In Alaska, it's expected to exceed $4 billion. In Georgia, it will be $2.5 billion in 2021 alone. Kentucky could see a nearly 20% drop in its revenues in 2021 at a time when the state's fiscal house is already in disorder. But we're being offered not a dime, zero, to help our cities, counties, and states confront this challenge. Zero. Nothing. That's not something that is acceptable. And that's the problem when we ignore regular order and let leadership hijack the legislative process. We lose our voice, and the needs of our constituents are left out. So I, for one, didn't come to Washington to sit on the sidelines and wait for a handful of people to reach a deal behind closed doors. forced to vote on a 1,000-page bill within an hour of seeing it. But that's exactly what we've been doing here for far too long. We need to end this high-stakes game of closed-door posturing and restore the Senate back to the foundation as the greatest deliberative body in the world. It would have been easier for me just to embrace the $900 billion in fiscal relief from the HEROES Act. It would have been easier for Senators Cassidy, Collins, and Hyde-Smith to just toe the party line. But we all knew that sticking to our respective corners wasn't going to help a single one of our constituents. And it's not too late for the Senate to get back on track. Let's do our jobs. Let's work together on a bipartisan solution that delivers the federal support our states, counties, and cities on the front lines of this pandemic need to defeat COVID-19 and serve the American people. Let's bring the SMART Act up in committee. Allow members on both sides of the aisle offer members to make the legislation even better. Because you all know what our state and local governments will get if we leave it up to the present status. Absolutely nothing. And good luck explaining that to the people back at home. Now, I hear some of my colleagues speak from this floor calling not for unity, but for division. They callously ignore the pleas for help from the fellow Americans, comforted by the selfish but mistaken belief their communities are immune to the fiscal Armageddon facing our communities. So let me be clear. It doesn't really matter how fiscally responsible or conservative your state budget has been when your revenue drops 30% overnight. It's not a red or blue state issue. It's an American priority. I believe that history will look kindly upon those who stood up for some unity and compromise over demagoguery and obstinacy. Those who put the well-being of the country over scoring partisan votes. Those who stuck their necks out and took a political risk for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. And that's what I believe we're doing on the floor now, the right thing to do. With that, happy to turn to my friend, Senator Collins.
Madam President,
Senator from Louisiana.
before Senator Collins speaks, I ask unanimous consent that Matthew Fegley, a fellow in my office, be granted floor privileges for the remainder of the Congress.
Without objection.
I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Madam President. I've listened to the presentations of my two colleagues, Senator Cassidy and Senator Menendez, and I could not agree with them more. We have an opportunity to solve a problem that is affecting each and every community in our country. With the COVID-19 pandemic continuing to devastate our public health and our economy, towns and cities across our country are facing increasingly significant new challenges and plummeting revenues at the exact same time. I urge my colleagues to be problem solvers, to address this crisis as part of the relief package that is now being negotiated. We cannot wait. I've joined with Senators Menendez and Cassidy and others in this chamber in introducing the SMART Act. It would provide much needed financial assistance to state and local governments while providing safeguards to prevent wasteful spending. It is a lifeline to our communities, just as the Paycheck Protection Program has been a lifeline to our small businesses and their employees. The consequences of local government shortfalls are dire. Without our providing them relief, communities face having to lay off essential employees and reduce services at the worst possible time for working families. What is their alternative? They cannot raise taxes. That would be the worst thing for them to do. Municipalities are already scaling back their budgets, furloughing workers, and postponing needed purchases and projects. Madam President, these cuts threaten the jobs of our police officers, our firefighters, our EMS personnel, our dispatchers, our sanitation crews, our public works employees, at the time when their services are vitally needed. They are the people who make our communities operate, that make them livable. We need them. And we already know about the stresses that our schools are undergoing. Do we really want school budgets to be cut and educators laid off at this important time? The CARES Act did provide $150 billion to our states and to very large communities. But those funds came with restrictions, and they did not require direct distributions to municipalities with populations under 500,000. Mr. President, there is not a single county in Maine, much less a city or town, that has a population of that level. The National Governors Association has called for $500 billion in assistance to aid our nation's recovery. Organizations supporting our towns and our cities and our counties have all endorsed the SMART Act. Moody's Analytics warns that failing to act could shave 3 percentage points from real GDP, from our economic growth, and result in the loss of 4 million jobs. That is the worst thing to happen at this time. This week, the Maine Municipal Association released projections anticipating a combined $146 million in lost revenue from Maine cities and towns by the end of this year alone. We know that the revenues are going to take a while to recover and are going to affect next year as well. This builds on the Maine's Revenue Forecasting Committee, which expects a $1.4 billion state budget shortfall from lost sales and income tax revenues over the next 3 years. As people are driving less, we're also seeing our gas tax revenues plummet. Mr. President, I have talked with town and city managers, with mayors and members of town councils and select men and women all across the state of Maine about the difficult decisions that they are facing as they attempt to balance their budgets. These cuts are not theoretical. The harm is not just possible. It is occurring today. Let's look briefly at what some Maine communities are already having to do. The city of Westbrook has announced a hiring freeze affecting all city departments, including the police department. Well, that police department has 5 open positions that it needs to fill and cannot do so. Auburn, a city in Androscoggin County, has had to freeze 6 vacant positions because of expected revenue losses. Again, vital positions: 2 firefighters, a police officer, and 3 public works employees. These cuts come as the city of Auburn has spent more than $200,000 in new expenses to respond to the virus. The town of Falmouth has eliminated 4 open positions, including a police officer, and can no longer go ahead with the purchase of a much-needed new fire truck. The town of Wyndham has kept 7 needed positions open. These are not large communities. This is a large number of positions. 5 of these are public work positions, without which, how is the plowing going to be done this winter to keep the roads safe and clear? The town has also postponed $1.6 million in capital projects. That has a ripple effect on the local economy. It means the contractors not buying supplies nor hiring employees at this time. In northern Maine, in the northern Maine city of Madawaska, the town manager has shared with my office that the town has had to scrap a $3 million road paving project and will have to keep at least 3 positions vacant. This is what they're doing already. It is only going to get worse for these towns and cities as revenues continue to plummet. Mr. President, Senator Menendez made a very important point that I want to reiterate, and that is the way our bill is structured. Every city, every town, regardless of size, will receive direct assistance. Every county will receive direct assistance. They will not be dependent on the largesse of the state. The money will go to them to meet these essential needs. It is common sense to provide the relief needed to avoid these widespread layoffs and cuts to essential services at the local level where they often are most often needed. These are the public servants who keep our communities and our citizens safe. They are the public servants who keep our communities and our citizens healthy. They are the public servants who keep our communities and our citizens educated. They are the ones who are plowing our roads and repairing our bridges. They are the ones who make our towns, our cities, our neighborhoods livable. Congress must act to provide assistance to every community. Mr. President, this is a problem we can solve. Let's enact the SMART Act as part of the next coronavirus package. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
President, I'm going to just briefly remove my mask. We are about 1 week into baseball season. I'll lighten this up a little bit, Mr. President. But 1 week into baseball season. Some of us here are huge baseball fans. This is home Nationals, home of the World Championship.